Hello and welcome to Being Productive When Working Remotely. This is Dan Paulson. I am the owner and CEO for Envision Development International. And I decided to put this presentation together to really help companies that maybe haven't experienced a lot of remote work before. Now that possibly your entire staff is not working at home, they're out uh, at their home office or sitting at their kitchen table, probably with kids running around. Uh, we got to figure out ways to help them work from where they're at. So I want to put this together to share with you some ideas of how you can do that, because as many of you have probably experienced, that working remotely is probably more of an occasional thing than a regular thing. There isn't really a lot of structure around it. Most people don't know how to do it because they've never done it before. They're used to having somebody sit at their desk that they can visually see, go up and talk to, and at least for now, that's going to change. So we have to learn how to work away from home. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, this is the second in a multi-part series. The first session I completed yesterday, which is Assess and Protect. Hopefully you have checked that out, or you will check that out. It's about 30 minutes in length and goes over, in times of adversity, what are things you can do with your business to kind of settle things in, get focused, and build an action plan off of. So I highly recommend you check that out, especially since that kind of leads into session 2, which is functioning in a virtual environment. Next, we'll have session 3, which is finding opportunities. That hasn't been created yet, so that's upcoming, just like session 4 and session 5 are. Session 4 is about staying visible, and I might bring in some marketing and sales experts to talk with me on that, so we can have an open conversation with that. And finally, keeping morale up, because as we're working from home, as we're more isolated, we lose that social connection, and that can make it very difficult for people. On top of it, there's a lot of changes happening right now that are impacting people's businesses, in most cases in a negative way. And how do you keep people focused, keep them moving forward, and not getting wrapped up in the negatives that could happen? So we'll talk more about that later as well. So let's go on to getting organized. So the first part is get organized and set your plan. The topics we're going to cover today include communications and expectations, changing hours to output. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Check-ins and projects, what you need to do to make sure that people working remotely are getting the things you need accomplished done. Setting up meetings. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for a lot of businesses, because I have worked in a number of companies that were great at having meetings, to schedule more meetings, to have more meetings, to schedule more meetings. Now that don't have our entire team around us all the time, it makes it a little bit more tricky to handle things that way. You can't always call everyone up and call them into a meeting. You have to plan it out. You have to be more focused. This is an opportunity to do that. And finally, what if you can't work remotely? Not every business out there has the luxury or the capability of working from home or working in some sort of remote location. There are people out there that do have to travel for work and work on site. There are people that do have to come into the office or the business. Think of a restaurant, for example, that otherwise, couldn't do their job. Now, this is all subject to change depending upon what happens as far as the virus goes. But we do need to be aware of, if there are times where people still can work, but they can't work in an office or they can't work at home, then what is it they're going to do? But first, this is the same slide as on my first session. We got to talk about safety. So follow CDC and WHO guidelines. Those are your best places to go for information and for updates. Look at your local government or national government news as far as what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Trust the official websites over what you see on places like Facebook or LinkedIn. There is a lot of information out there. Some of it is valid, some of it is speculation, a lot of uncertainty. So stick with what you know, stick with what is going to be the most accurate. Next, practice social distancing. If you are listening to this session especially, that is something that you are already probably working on. So keep your distance. Also, wash your hands. Best way to prevent the virus is to keep your hands clean. That will save you a lot of trouble in the long run. Practice self-care. Spend time for yourself. Don't just work all the time. You do need time to breathe. You need time to relax. You need time to work out, find ways to alleviate that stress and get back into a routine. Also, keep as much of your life as normal as possible. This isn't a complete lockdown. You can go outside, you can move around. You're just expected to keep distance from others to prevent the spread of the virus. So, if that is the case, and assuming that is still the case when you listen to this, try to keep life as normal as possible and go out and do things. Just limit your travel to places where there's going to be large groups of people. Finally, if you feel ill, stay away. Even if it feels like a cold, best bet is to stay home or stay away from other people. If it continues to get worse, contact your local officials, authorities, and find out what you need to do next. It might require you traveling to a special location to get testing and quarantine, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Just if you're not feeling good, stay away from others. And finally, have fun. We got to remember that even in times like this, we need to find ways to have fun, entertain ourselves, stay happy, stay positive, stay motivated. So keep on it. First off, let's start with communication and expectations. This is something that most companies right now don't have structured. They've had to send people home, or people have chose to work remotely. We have not worked out how people need to effectively do that. So you actually need to create a communication plan to assist with that. And you need to set clear expectations that when people are working from home, what needs to be accomplished and when. So let's keep that in mind. First of all, be as transparent as possible. Let's make sure we are getting as much information into the hands of our team as we possibly can. The reason for doing that is uncertainty will cause a lot more disruption than awareness. If you can share something, please share it. Keep upfront about things. If people have questions, answer the questions. The problems you will run into if you don't do this is through the uncertainty, you will create scare and panic. And that does not help you do anything to keep your business running when people are concerned about either their own safety or their own welfare. Do as much as you can to keep things above board. Next, work with the team to set productivity expectations. Notice I didn't say you set the productivity expectations. I said work with the team, because your people are working remotely. You might know their situation. You might know that they're married, they have kids. Those kids are probably at home right now. The norm is they can't just go home and work 8 hours, or they can't stay at home and work 8 hours. So they have to manage their personal lives in conjunction with their professional lives. Now, realistically, we've all kind of been doing this over the past 10 to 20 years because of the way that we are now networked and connected. So we're using technology to work during off hours and not necessarily 9 to 5 like it used to be. This is a great opportunity to improve on this process and make it actually easier in the future for employees to take time away from the office and still know that they're being productive. But what you have to do is you have to be clear about what you expect when somebody is working away from the office. And this will even help when they do come back to the office, because if we know what we expect them to do each day and what we expect them to get done, it's going to be a lot easier to measure how well they are doing or performing in their job. It should also become easier to measure when those different obstacles or challenges get in the way, or their capacity fills up to the point where they can no longer do their job at the same level anymore. It's a time when you probably need to either bring new blood in, or hire new people, or do something different to change their workload. Also, what is being measured? How do you know when somebody is successful at what they do? What are you doing to measure their daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual performance? We have never typically set that up. We usually do our annual reviews, and we set metrics there, but have we really broken it down to where now you can't see that employee every day? You don't see them in meetings. You don't see them at their desk. How do you know what they're doing? Let's figure out ways to measure that. So set up a program for each employee when they're working away from home, what is expected, and follow that up with some reporting. How do they get the information back to you? They probably can't call you all the time, but what can they do? Can they send an email letting you know what they worked on that day? Can they put it in a community folder or a virtual folder that you can access to see what they've been working on? There are different things you can do. And this, again, it becomes a great opportunity to move into a true leadership role, move away from management. So this isn't about micromanaging. This is about staying connected, touching base, following up, and assisting your team and becoming even better at what they do. Next, schedule virtual meetings and touch base. We will talk more about how to schedule those meetings later on, but it's important that we can't just send an email, tell somebody what to do, and then hope that it gets done. There's a lack of clarity on maybe what needs to be done. There's a lack of understanding, and this is where having those virtual meetings and using the tools that are available out there to touch base is going to be quite helpful. Changing hours to output. For centuries now, we have associated with dollars per hour. Somebody makes so many dollars per hour. Maybe they make a salary, but we also make that salary on the assumption that they're working a certain number of hours each week. That's what we do to justify that pay scale. The reality is our world's changed enough at this point where we should be able to some degree measure productivity. And that's really where it comes down to understanding each role that a person plays in your business. What does that team member do? How do they go about performing the tasks that they do, and what's the output they create? Because if you have an employee, you have an employee to essentially create output or create productivity. Well, what does that look like? It's going to be different from person to person. So this is where managers and different leaders need to really look at people on an individual basis and determine what that individual role is and what they're responsible for. And ultimately, then that leads to output or productivity. Set daily meetings. So as a leader, you need to do that with your team. Set up daily productivity measures that help them get their job done, help them know that they're achieving what they need to achieve. We also need to make sure we're being realistic about it. All too often, we hand people a laundry list of things we want them to do. But have you ever taken the time to say, okay, this week between Monday and Friday, we need to accomplish these things. Each day, I would expect to see certain activities completed or checked off. And really getting it to a point that, again, we can measure and track how people are doing. Because we're not going to worry about whether they're there from 9 to 5. We're just going to expect that sometime in that day, they're going to get those things done. So we have to be realistic about what they get done. And we also have to make sure it's realistic given the situation that they're in right now. We're going to have a number of people running around that home that could impact their ability to stay productive. They could be getting interrupted from their kids. They could have to feed their kids lunch. It's going to be a different situation than it's been in the past. So we got to keep that in mind. Clarity on expectations. Be very clear about what you expect that employee to do, what you expect that team member to act on. Let them know and make sure they communicate back to you so there's a clear understanding of what's going to be working right now. The clearer you are on expectations, the happier you will be with people working remotely, the happier they will be. Because if we can measure their productivity at a level that we can tell that they're doing as much or more working from home, why do they need to come into the office? This is where we can start moving to a new normal and allowing people more flexibility in their work schedules, but still allowing them to get the same things done or even more for that matter. Check-ins on projects. Often there is not enough follow-up. We tell people what to do. We expect them to go ahead and do it. When they don't do it the way we want, we get disappointed. We either take the project over, we get upset, and we expect them to redo it. But ultimately, we haven't set up the right protocols or the right communication to make sure that it's getting done. So first of all, look at setting up a group communication schedule. When I work with dentists, when I work with small businesses, we call those huddles. And those huddles could be daily or weekly. Sometimes they might be biweekly or monthly, but what they are is they are regular communication time where you pull all the team together to talk about what's going on, what needs to be done, and when it needs to be completed by. This typically doesn't happen in a lot of workplaces that I see, at least at a level that it needs to. Typically, it's at a much higher level. It's much broader than getting down into the specifics of what's going on. It's more just here's what's coming up and we'll be dealing with it. Well, now because again, everyone is working remotely and somewhat independently, we still have to find ways to keep them working together. So creating a group communication schedule and a way that we can get information into their hands to let them know what needs to be done is going to be beneficial. We also need a feedback loop to learn from them what are the things that they're getting stuck with or what's preventing them from completing a task. So working remotely, you can't just run down to the file cabinet and grab something. How easily available is the information that they need? Can they access it virtually? Can they access it online? Do they have tools to do that? Is your server set up that they can remote in and work on programs from wherever they're at, but do so through a virtual terminal? And those are things that we've got to consider. We also need to set up one-on-one touch-base meetings. Right now is pretty tough for a lot of people, and the less individual communication that they're receiving is also going to impact their morale and how they're doing their job. What we need to do is we need to make sure that on a regular basis, probably multiple times a week, we're at least taking time to talk with that person on an individual level. Make sure things are going okay with them personally. Make sure things are going okay professionally. Make sure they have all the tools they need to have to get the job done, because that's ultimately what's going to be important here is we need to somehow help them stay within their routine so that they can feel purposeful and productive, because right now sitting at home just binge watching Netflix is not really a great way to spend all your time. Sure, do that sometimes for fun, but at the same point, stay purposeful, stay engaged at work. And that leads to work reporting to HQ. How do they get information back in your hands to know that they are doing the job you expect them to do? And what are you doing to do that? Is there a printed report that they have to fill out? Do they send an email with their objectives, which are discussed in the one-on-one touch base or in the group communication that happens? Figure out the best platform or the best format to get that information flowing back and forth. So there is that feedback loop going on and people know what to do. If you have any questions about how to do this, at the end of this, you'll be able to reach out and contact me, and I can walk you through some steps to help you with that. Meetings. Let's talk about meetings, because most meetings are terrible. They suck. And if you talk to most people who work in corporate America, they will tell you they have way too many meetings that are very unproductive and that just eat up a lot of their time and prevent them from actually doing productive work. Like I said, this is an opportunity. This is a great chance for you to take the time to improve your business and get so efficient at what you do that you can minimize the amount of meetings to meetings that are going to be more productive. And that's the key word here. Meetings for the sake of having meetings or for just communication purposes aren't always what's needed. And people want to throw more meetings on things because they think they use those for clarity. And really, a lot of times what I find is many meetings are just set up to be counterproductive. They're a sign of wanting to get consensus on something and then failing to make any decisions at all. And we want to avoid that. So what we want to do is we want to set up a meeting structure that is going to be effective and produce the right outcomes that you want. First thing we need to start with is how many meetings do you need to have when people are working remotely? Like I said, you need group meetings, you need individual meetings. Depending upon the size of your organization, you might need an all hands meeting, and maybe you have the capabilities to handle something like that. Maybe you don't. So you got to figure out what's your delivery method, how many meetings you need to have, and then from there, what do you need to set up? So with any meeting, there should be a clear agenda. A meeting should start on time, it should end on time. It should have somebody who's a note taker. It should have somebody who's a clock watcher. It should have somebody who's a facilitator. And this may or may not be you as a leader. So you have to keep that in mind, that you have to set up the structure that anyone can follow it. With the agenda, you have to determine the length of the meeting. Is the meeting going to be 15 minutes, a half hour, an hour, or longer? In most cases, in remote situations, I would recommend a shorter meeting agenda, no more than an hour. In many cases, no more than a half hour. It's very hard to keep a person's attention span when they've got maybe a headphone and microphone in their face, and they're looking at a computer screen and watching all their emails pop up and kids pulling on them and everything else. So the shorter, more concise meetings are going to be far more effective when looking at remote situations. Look at the length of time. Next, what's the outcome? Every meeting should have a decision point, and that decision point should lead to an actionable outcome. If you have meetings to just talk about things and then have to schedule another meeting to actually make a decision or take action on it, you've failed to do your job. Every meeting has a beginning and an end. When you get to that end, you need to make sure the outcome is set and the action is set and who's going to be doing what is in place. So this is where we assign activities. This is where we set timelines. This is where we set how we're going to follow up. We're going to measure what's successful, what's not. We're going to clarify when people need to ask questions or who they go to ask questions, not when they need to ask questions necessarily. We need to make sure we have all those things in place. That's what's really going to help you be more successful with your meetings. And what I find is meetings can be shorter. They can be more focused. They can get a lot more accomplished if you stick to a clear agenda and a clear outcome and you get everyone engaged. You also, I should add this, so this is a bonus, write this down. There are some people that are going to need information ahead of time. And you should always get in the habit of sending information out ahead of your meeting schedule. This allows people who need time to process and think to provide a thoughtful response the time to actually do that. There are people that can shoot off the hip and be just fine. There are other people that need a full day to think about that information and think about what they're going to talk about or what they're going to say. Make sure you give people that time. Also, be sure that you set up your meetings that it covers multiple stages of learning. So typically we look at visual, auditory, and kinesthetic as the primary three types of learning or learning styles that we have. If you send an email, there are a number of meetings that could probably be handled in email. Right now, email is not always your best choice. I'm sure everyone's getting plenty of email. You can do things visually. This is where video comes in. Video can be really handy. Use tools, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that allow you to video so you can see people on screen. It also allows you to, in some cases, record that. So people who, again, need more time to process or want to review, you could record the meetings and then you could share that again. It also creates a good record of what was discussed and what was planned for the outcome. So visual, auditory, kinesthetic. What are people going to do? What action are they going to take? This is another part of it. So you have to hit these. You have to talk about it multiple times, which is hopefully what you're hearing. There needs to be a repetition going on. There needs to be clarity. There needs to be feedback. There needs to be follow-up. All these things need to happen in order for you to be successful with remote meetings. So what tools are you going to use? Well, there are multiple tools out there. Some are free. Some are fairly low cost. I'll just share a few of them here and you can determine what ones are going to be the best for you because there's probably other ones out there that you could use as well. The one I like the best and the one I use, in fact, I'm using it to record this, is Zoom. And Zoom meetings are virtual meetings where you can record the content, you can set up video cameras so you can see who's on the call, you can share screens, you can run it much like a webinar, you can chat or ask questions throughout that process as somebody's talking. So it's a very effective tool and a very cost-effective tool for most people to use. I think it's roughly, for a pretty standard license, it's about $150 to $200 a year. Don't quote me on that, go to their pricing guide, but it is fairly cost-effective to use. Next one is Skype, and Skype's been around for a long time. I also have a Skype account. I typically have used Skype accounts for doing long distance calls. I use it as my office number. When I was doing a lot of traveling back and forth between China many years ago, I was able to actually make calls from China using Skype without an additional charge. So there's a flat monthly fee I pay, which gives me a Skype number and gives me the ability to call anywhere in the world unlimited. It's a great feature to have. And if you do a lot of international calls or you're doing a lot of long distance calls, it's less of an issue now the way the cellular phones are set up, but it allows you to make those calls pretty effectively. Like any internet tool, it works as well as the internet does. And sometimes it is great. Sometimes it needs a little tweaking, but overall it's a very good tool to have. And it can be quite helpful for handling this remote work that you need to do. Next one's fairly new. I don't have a lot of experience with, but I see Microsoft is advertising it quite a bit. And I'm sure given the circumstances that we are in at the time I'm recording this, that's probably why. But Microsoft Meetings, which is Microsoft also owns Skype, so it's tied into that Microsoft Teams suite where you can actually set up meetings through Microsoft and do the virtual calls, conferencing, and everything like that. Another one, an oldie but a goodie, is GoToMeeting. Used a lot for webinars and other things, but I also have a number of people that have a GoToMeeting account and a GoToMeeting number. It's very similar to how Zoom works. Just again, a different brand and a different type of setup, but either way, you can check out which ones are best for you and which ones you need to work through there. Finally, video. I mentioned this earlier. Video can be a very effective tool and is very easy to use right now. Pretty much you can get a stand for your phone and your phones record excellent video quality right now. You could do a tape at your desk and you could get that information out, send it out either via email or post it on YouTube, someplace like that, where other people can access it. And that's going to be important because, like I said, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. You need to get information out in different ways. Yes, some people will absorb email just fine. Some people will watch video and it'll be better there because they'll also be able to see it and hear it. So you really have to look at how people process information. You have to provide multiple channels to do that. That's what's going to lead to effective communication and make sure that while people are working remotely, they're getting things done. Last but not least is email. Email is an overused tool. It is not the best communication tool out there. That said, it is something that you need to have for a tool that you're using. When you use email, though, be clear on what it's for. Be clear, especially if it's a group email, who's going to need to take action on what and what sort of follow-up they need to do. A lot of times I will recommend that people put any action items in the subject line for the email because that's the first thing that people see. So they'll see where the email is coming from, but if they don't see anything important in that subject line, it might just go into their inbox and they might forget about it or not touch it. Keep that in mind when you're sending out emails. So be very clear of what the purpose of that email is, if it's to send attachments, if it's to ask them to follow up on something. Just make sure you're taking the time to get the response back that you need. But now what if you can't work remotely? Because I have several clients out there that do field work. There are restaurants, there are other businesses or offices, retail, for example, assuming that all these are still open, that are going to require them to have employees that work on site. And if you circle back to one of the first slides I shown, having a safety plan in place, having a health and safety plan, which restaurants are probably going to be more familiar with something like that because of HACCP procedures that they commonly have to follow. But I think going forward, most businesses are going to have some sort of communication plan around health and safety, especially after this pandemic. So why not work on something like that now? Figure out how you clean areas, who cleans areas, what systems you have in place to keep areas clean and safe. And when something like this happens again, because the probability is there will be something that comes along like this again, what are you going to do in these situations? What protocols are you going to have set up so the next time it isn't a surprise or it isn't a quick reaction to a response that is dictated by someone or something else? Have that all in place. Also, minimize contact as much as you can. With the field guys that I was talking about, they can go out and they can work on site or they can work on equipment, often by themselves. So they're never in contact with anybody else. But you should also have a cleaning protocol for them when they are working remotely. Do they have gloves if they need them? Do they have Lysol wipes or something to sanitize the work area? What are they doing for cleanup afterwards to make sure that anything they didn't contaminate the space for somebody else? What are they doing to leave that space cleaner than they found it? We need to figure all those things out. And ultimately, if you are having people come to your office because you need to, figure out a way to spread out. Find more room. Give people that 6+ feet of space difference. So that way people are more comfortable working in the same environment, but protected either way. These are just a few simple steps, but you definitely need to make sure you have some sort of plan in place so you can keep your people out there and working, because ultimately it's very hard for any business to function if they can't bring revenue in. And some businesses are going to struggle right now. When it comes to restaurants, I feel sorry for those guys because many requirements are for shutting down restaurants at this time. But if you can still do curbside delivery, if you can do things that will keep your customers and your employees safe, by all means do so. And let's work through this. Let's figure out how to get out on the other side. So in review, set your expectations. Be very clear about your expectations of others. Make sure your others have clear expectations of you. Keep that line of communication open. Keep it transparent. Communicate effectively. What are you doing to make sure everyone knows and understands what they need to do, and vice versa? Have a clear communication protocol in place so people understand. Focus on output instead of hours. No longer are you going to have people sitting at their desk or over by the coffee bar, whatever it might be. They're going to be working from home. They're going to be working right now in a situation where there are going to be other people at home around them in most cases, and those are going to lead to distractions. So let's be realistic about the goals that we set for the output. Follow up and follow through. There still needs to be regular communication happening. This is what you should be doing as a leader anyway. So make sure you are touching base with your team individually and as a group. Make sure you are getting feedback from them just as they're getting feedback from you. Check in on assignments that have been written down that are supposed to be completed. Make sure they're getting done. If they aren't getting done, find out why. Find out what's happening. Work with them on it. It's nobody's fault that they're sitting at home right now, but we've got to work through this process and figure it out. Next, optimize your meetings. Any meetings you have are going to be virtual at this point in most cases, and they're going to have to be short, sweet, to the point. How do you get those meetings as impactful as possible, as meaningful as possible, as optimized as possible to produce the best result, while not adding more meetings to the mix? Because if somebody's in a meeting in the office and they're in several meetings throughout an 8-hour day, and you just push those to being home, again, there's probably more distractions, and they're probably going to be even less productive than they are internally. So figure out how to change that. Use this as an opportunity to really optimize how you communicate with your team. Use tech effectively. There's a lot of technology out there. Much of this technology can help keep your business up and going during this time. Figure out how to use it the most effective way possible so you can minimize the impact and so we can get back to a normal life much quicker. And if you do have a situation where you have to have people on site or they have to work with others, what's your plan for that? What's your action plan? What's your safety plan? Put all those things in place so that we know that when they're out there, they're going to be safe and everything's going to work out just fine. So like I said, you can reach out to me at plan-coach-develop.com. Feel free to pop me an email or give me a call. There is also a link on here that you can write down. And what I'm doing is a 30-minute pay what you want meeting with me. So if there is something you're stuck with, if there's something you're stressed out about, you need some help, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do it. And like I said, if I provide no value, no worries. Don't have to pay me anything. If I do provide some value, figure out what it's worth and pay whatever you can at this time. That's it for me today. This has been session 2. We will look forward to talking to you again on session 3 that will be coming up in the near future. If you have any questions, again, I encourage you to reach out, and thank you all. Hope you have a great day. Stay safe.